Okay, hey everybody, and welcome to How to Draw a Horse. Okay, and before we learn how to draw anything, first we need to understand how it works. How does this thing work? That way, when we draw it, it can have the same kind of functionality, and the same kind of functionality will come through the drawing. Okay, and when we're drawing horses, I want to start off with the legs and how do the legs work? Because a lot of people they assume that the legs work kind of backwards to how a person's legs work, okay? When actually it doesn't. A lot of people they feel like this part is the knee, the ankle part is the knee, but that is not the knee. Really, where the knee is it's right here. And how the leg works is that the femur starts here, goes to the knee, and now we get to the ankle. And the ankle leads to the foot. And all of this area right here, this is considered, if you kind of relate it to our own feet, this is considered the whole entire foot. Same thing with the front legs. This is actually where the shoulders are. The shoulders will connect to the elbow, which is there, and then this little area right here, this is the wrist, right, going to the one toe. So once we understand that, then wow, now we can start to see the similarities, right? If this area is the knee, and this area is the elbow, now all of a sudden we can see how it relates to a human leg and a human arm. Next important information is the spine. Where exactly is the spine on a horse? That's something that's going to be very important as well. So we have the tail, which is very obvious, right? We can all see where the tail would be on a horse. And then we have the actual spine. So where's the spine? It doesn't curve like that because there's no strength in such a curve when this animal is constantly on all fours. It needs some strength there. So it's much more of a straighter line for the spine. And then at a point, the spiky parts of the vertebrae, it gets higher, right? So then it feels like there's a bit of a curve in the spine when there's actually not. Then the neck of the horse, we don't want to assume the spine runs along the back of the neck. It actually runs more like in the middle of the neck. Okay, and just knowing this little fact helps us be able to move, twist, bend the neck at the proper location. And remember the little spiky things on the back of the vertebrae, they'll kind of go like that. Okay, and if we kind of take away everything else, now we can start to see the mechanics of a horse a lot easier. Next thing that I want to dive into is the main skeletal structures of the horse. Starting off with the rib cage. The rib cage is a big section, so let's definitely go in there. And the rib cage is very much shaped just like our own rib cages, except that we want to remember that the rib cage doesn't go all the way down to the very bottom of the horse's belly here. It actually finishes quite a bit above, and then there's a whole bunch of layers of muscles and fat and so on and so forth that makes up that extra volume. Next, let's go to the skull. So we have the spine going in to the top area of the back of the head, and then it connects to the skull. So the skull, we can kind of symbolize that in two different sections. One is the top section, and the other part is the bottom section, the jaw area. If we kind of take away everything else, you can kind of see the simplified version. It's somewhat of a triangle shape. We can really symbolize the whole entire thing, I feel, in this general kind of triangular shape, okay, that's broken up into a nice big jaw and then perhaps a little chunk cut out for the nose area. And the last major part of the skeletal structure of a horse should be the pelvis. And unlike a human pelvis that looks more like a basket shape, you can see that the horse's pelvis is relatively flat because it doesn't need to stand upright. It doesn't need to hold all of that weight in the pelvis. The next parts I want to talk about are the main shapes of the horse. Okay, now that we have the main skeletal structure, what are the main shapes of a horse? Well, I kind of see it in just a few parts. We have the main mass of a horse, which would be something to the effect of this, where we take into account the skeletal structure of the horse and the mass of the horse. So kind of like a big stone right here, or a bean, so to speak. Okay, then we have the back side of the horse and the front side of the horse. And what I like to do is I like to just imagine that this shape just goes right around the horse, through the horse. We can see through the neck a little bit, and that's how it ends up on the other side. And the horse has a bit of a chest as well, just like a person does, except it's nice and small. The neck, however, is quite big compared to a person because this horse needs to hold its head up all the time. And for it to do that, those need to be really big, strong muscles. Then, of course, we have the head, and the head, we can follow a lot of what we did previous with the skull, except now we're adding in the lips and the muzzle and indications of the eyes. Now we go to the legs, and we're going to do the exact same thing as we did for the head. We can use the skeletal structure that we just put down to indicate where the joints are, and then flesh out the masses around those areas. Do the same on the back legs here. And then a slight indication of the tail. Now, sketching things out, I don't usually draw all the bones and then all the muscles and then layer and layer and layer. A lot of things, what I do is I will do them all at once. I'll think about them all at once. This helps to keep the page clean, and therefore it gives me actually an easier time to draw out a nice horse. So usually if I was going to draw out this horse and just sketch it out, this is what I would end up with. Something that looks much more like this. It's almost like a caveman drawing here, but you can see a few different things here. You can see the direction of the legs. You can see this angle that I have here for the pelvis. You can see an indication of the rib cage and the midsection. You can also see where that triangular kind of head is, and you can see where the neck is. This is what I refer to as sketch language. Like with any sketch, you want to be able to understand your sketch when you're going to more of a finished product. So these sketches in the very beginning should include everything that you find the most important about your subject. And here are some tips about how to represent what you see so that you can understand it later and you can still put things down in a very effective way. One thing that I'll constantly do is I won't actually draw a line to represent the bones of a horse. Instead, what I'll do is I'll indicate landmarks of where those bones will be noticed in the finished image. So in other words, a little bit where the knee is right here, a little bit where the ankle is right here. Because a lot of times if you are drawing a line straight through, then all of a sudden I still need to figure out, well, where are the sides of the horse's legs? But if I just kind of concentrate in the middle and think, okay, that's where my bones are going to be, and that's where the knee is going to be, and that's going to lead to ankle, and the ankle is going to be here. So I'm just going to put a little indication here. Can't you kind of see the rest of the leg? Can't you kind of picture that a little easier? This is what I'm talking about, sketch language. So same thing with the front leg up here. Instead of drawing one continuous line, that might be very difficult to do. Instead, I look for landmarks. And those are the lines that I'll put down so that when I need to look at those lines again, I can really tell where to go from there, how to continue it on. So after my very loose sketch of the initial drawing of this horse, what I'll do is I'll put in my sketch language, and this is an example of what that might look like. You can see that a lot of things are simplified, but you can definitely see what each one of them means. You can see that this is the bend in the knee, here's the ankle, there's the hoof, so on and so forth. You can see some roundness for the chest right there, and you can see the head of the horse is very, very simplified and just dots for the eyes, indications of the ears going straight back, and you can see a lot of these lines are very much completely straight. I use straight lines and curved lines a lot of times to show me where the soft masses are and where the tension is, where the stretching is. Of course, where the stretching is, that's where the straight lines are. Where the curved areas are, those are generally the areas that are softer, more relaxed, more compressed. Then once we're done that, the next step to this is to redraw everything in detail. If your landmarks are right, then this will be a very easy job for you. What you want to do is you want to look at every simplified line that you have here and see how can I add correct information to this. So perhaps rounding this area a bit, rounding this area a little bit. And together it feels like this nice fluid line, even though in the beginning it was two completely separate lines. Adding subtleties to the muscles, putting in more intricate details into the ankles. You can see in the example provided that I go over each area and I add a bit of anatomy to it, so it isn't so geometrical anymore, but it still has the essence of the sketch. This is very important because as we build on top of a sketch, the toughest part is keeping the life of the sketch alive. The key thing to stay away from here is to go over every line exactly how it is, because then you're not actually adding any information. You're only modifying information to make the lines darker or whatnot. The next thing that I want to point out here are the subtle angle changes. You know, if it's absolutely profile, then you're going to be taking away a lot of the life of the drawing. If something is completely profile, it almost feels more cartoonish. It almost feels more graphic-like. That tends to make things feel stiff. It tends to make things feel a little bit less lifelike. So what I like to do is think about the subtle angles that I can do on this horse. For example, if you look at the eyes, it almost feels like a side shot. It almost feels like a profile shot of the head, but you can see this slight indication right here of the other eye on the other side. So it's just giving a slight angle. There's also subtleties in the front legs. These front legs are not bent the exact same way, and that's done on purpose because then that would feel very robotic. So I give the legs a slightly different bend on each one of them. Same with the back legs. I give them a slightly different view on each one of those back legs so that the back legs aren't exactly the same. They aren't being twinned from one back leg to the other. The next thing that I like to go over is the line weight. Now the line weight can represent many different things. It can represent the actual weight of the subject. And because the chest is just so massive, perhaps that would be a great reason to put a nice thick line weight down for the chest. It could also be used to help divide one area from another, like for example this leg from the other leg. It could also be used to represent bones. Bones tend to be a harder area. Harder things tend to have sharper shadows, and that can a lot of times be translated into line weight. You can see where I'm indicating more of a thicker line. Those are the areas where there's much more of an indication of bone. And if you looked at this image from a bit further away, then you would definitely get that sense. This front leg, in order for it to feel more separated from the chest, I'm going to give that a nice indication of line weight, making it a bit heavier so that it feels a bit more separated from the body of the horse. And then where the two hooves intersect each other, I'm going to make sure to keep my line weight a little darker, a little bit more emphasized at those intersecting areas so that even from far away, it feels like two separate legs. For areas that feel a little bit more subtle, instead of drawing an actual line across to show that detail, sometimes it's better to just put a few thin lines side by side, creating a softer line. So a heavier line weight can represent many different things. It can represent bone, it can represent shadow, it can emphasize a separation of different elements, or just when you really feel it. And lastly, any secondary action. Now, even if the horse is completely standing still, there might still be some secondary action just because wind is coming along and blowing some of the hair, some of the mane from the horse. But if it is an action pose, then it's even more important to add in some secondary action to show the motion, to show that the horse is actually moving. For this part, we want to also think about everything that we were talking about before as well, line weight, and add in a bit of that into the secondary action as well. And secondary action doesn't just have to mean the hair and things like that. It could actually mean things outside of the horse. Perhaps the dust that's kicking up, water that it might be splashing through, Things like this all adds to the secondary action. If you'd like to know more about drawing animals and creatures in general, I would highly recommend one of my absolute heroes of creature design, Tara Whitlatch. She teaches an amazing course on schoolism.com called Creature Anatomy with Tara Whitlatch. Definitely check that out. I also teach a course, Painting Creatures. If you like these tutorials and you want to see more, definitely sign up for the newsletter. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel or favorite this video if you want to come back to it. Thank you very much, everybody.